Hello everyone. I've created this video on Russia and climate change to help you with your homework on the ecological situation in Russia. Climate change, that is the warming of the Earth's climate, is one of the greatest ecological threats, one of the greatest threats to the natural environment and indeed the human environment that Russia faces. Climate change is likely to mean rising temperatures. In Russia, that could mean the melting of the permafrost. It could mean the rising of sea levels. Climate change could also mean changes in weather patterns, perhaps more drought in some places, heavier rainfall in others. Melting permafrost could lead to the ground becoming unstable, leading to the collapse of roads and buildings across, well, much of Siberia. Gases could be released into the atmosphere, which speed up the process of climate change as a result of the melting of permafrost. Changes in weather patterns and temperature could make some parts of Russia warmer and more comfortable to live in. But if the weather becomes more difficult to predict, it could be a major problem for agriculture. Russian grain production, for example, could be severely threatened if long periods of drought become more common. So what causes climate change? Well, climate change really is caused by three processes that work together. And the first of these is the burning of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, which include the burning of oil, the burning of coal and natural gas, which releases gases into the atmosphere, which have the effect of warming the atmosphere. Now, there are many natural processes which release these gases into the atmosphere as well. But the point is that human activity has greatly increased the quantity of these gases in the atmosphere. So if you look at the diagram in front of you, you'll see that there are a number of examples there of human activities that create what it refers to as man-made emissions. In other words, gases released into the atmosphere as a result of human activity. So, for example, the production of energy. As you know, Russia is heavily dependent upon fossil fuels to generate electricity. And the burning of those fossil fuels release carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. There's also road traffic and transport, of course. Agriculture is another important source of greenhouse gases, particularly methane, which is emitted by cattle. Now, if you look at some of the natural causes of emissions, some of those natural causes are actually also connected with human activity. And an example of this is wildfires, because wildfires can be caused by the poor management of forests or the neglect of forests. Wildfires can also be caused by the warming of the climate, more extreme weather conditions, which can be caused, as we've said, by human activity. In places like Canada, for example, and also Australia, there have been huge wildfires in recent summers because those summers are getting hotter and hotter. Okay, so the first thing that causes climate change is the burning of fossil fuels, which causes the release of certain gases into the atmosphere, particularly carbon dioxide, but also methane. Now, the next factor which causes climate change is the trapping of the heat from the sun within the atmosphere. So the solar heat, solar rays reach the Earth, they bounce off the Earth, and these greenhouse gases trap more of the heat generated by the sun within the Earth's atmosphere. So instead of the heat just bouncing off the Earth and going back into the space, a lot of heat is trapped within the atmosphere by these greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide. So the higher the quantity of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the more heat is trapped within the atmosphere, warming the Earth. And so the greenhouse gases, as they're known, work like a greenhouse, keeping heat within the earth and raising the temperature of the air, of the land, and also of the oceans. So how far is Russia responsible for the production of greenhouse gases? Well, if you look at the two diagrams here, we got some interesting and important information about that. On the left-hand side, we see the absolute quantity of CO2 emissions produced by different countries. So these are the absolute totals, the total quantity of carbon dioxide emissions produced by individual countries in different years. So across the bottom of the diagram, we have the years 1990 until 2018, and up the vertical axis, we have the quantity of CO2 emissions in gigatons. And what you can see there is that Russia's contribution to global CO2 emissions is relatively small. It's around about 3%. Now, Russia's share of the world population is about 2%. So Russia's emissions are not particularly excessive in terms of Russia's share of the world's population. However, Russia's share is still more than the share of most of the countries of the world. As you can see, Russia is in fifth place if we put all the countries of the EU together as one category. So we have China, the USA, the European Union, India, and then Russia. Now, on the right-hand side, we have what's called the per capita CO2 emissions. And this is CO2 emissions per person. And here we can see that Russia features more prominently in the table. It's actually in second place. And of course, one of the reasons for that is that, as I've already said, Russia's emissions are, as it were, greater than its share of the world's population. 3% of the world's emissions on just 2% of the world's population. And therefore, Russia's per capita emissions are much higher than most other countries. Remember, China, which is responsible for almost 15 gigatons of CO2 emissions in 2018, has more than 1.4 billion people living in it. And therefore, China's per capita, per person CO2 emissions are lower than Russia's. Okay, so therefore, Russia is in some respect quite a high emitter of CO2, particularly when we look at the figures per capita as opposed to the absolute figures. And of course, one of the reasons for this is that Russia is heavily reliant on fossil fuels for energy. Russia relies on oil, coal, and natural gas for about 64% of its electricity requirements, which is a relatively high figure. Of course, Russia is also a country which is still heavily engaged in manufacturing, and manufacturing industries, which use a great deal of energy, are also responsible for significant levels of carbon dioxide emissions. For example, the Russian metallurgy industry, which, as you know, uses a great deal of electricity. This is an interesting diagram which I found recently, which describes the air quality of Moscow. The air quality of Moscow from November through to April. And what you'll notice is that the air quality of Moscow has improved significantly since March. Now, the emissions of greenhouse gases, of carbon dioxide and similar gases into the atmosphere within the city is very heavily influenced by the amount of traffic. Now, with the lockdown following the growth of coronavirus, the amount of traffic on Moscow's streets has gone down, and as you can see, the air quality has improved. The good air quality is represented by the line in the green color, and poor air quality is represented in the red parts of the line. And this shows that that Russia itself can make a difference, certainly to the creation of better air quality within its major cities, and quite possibly Russia can make a difference to the problem, or finding a solution to the problem of global warming. But having said that, of course, Russia is still only 3% of the world's CO2 emissions. So 97% of the world's CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions are the responsibility of other countries. So this is a problem which Russia cannot solve on its own. And yet this is a problem which could affect Russia perhaps more dramatically than almost any other country in the world because of Russia's location. Okay, I hope you found that, that video useful. I intend to make another video which will actually go through the specific ecological threats that Russia faces, and we'll talk about some of the things that Russia might be able to do to deal with those threats and make them less threatening. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for listening. Hope everybody's okay, and goodbye.